Hello and welcome. Again, I'm Kiki Jamieson from the Pace Center in the Politics Department. I'm delighted to be here. I'm particularly excited to follow that first panel since the focus has been on how we are creating students who are really making a significant impact on these issues. At Princeton, civic engagement as clear and main focus is on helping students learn how to tackle solving significant public problems. We want to connect with academic departments, and we do, to help students, often in their independent work, and as Steve pointed out, their non-term time, break trips, break time, summer work, to figure out how they too can participate in taking active leadership roles in this. We know that you can get a lot of information from books, but you also gain a lot from experience, and our role at the Pace Center is to help students bridge that gap to create those opportunities. It's the difference between understanding the form and understanding the function in the real world. And so we all work together with these departments to create those opportunities to get out in the world and see what actually works and what doesn't. We focus together on teaching students how to gather and analyze information about public problems, how to propose and test solutions, how to rework ideas that may not work in the field, how to consult with colleagues both in the academy and out, how to teach and learn with peers, and importantly, how to practice public work. We're delighted to partner with the Grand Challenges Initiative. It really is the premier program on campus to facilitate this kind of work, where it combines research, teaching, and importantly, engagement with these public issues. Students love the fact that it's interdisciplinary, that it gives them opportunities to interact so closely with faculty and with graduate students, and importantly, to break out of the Princeton bubble. For students, participation in the Grand Challenges Initiative is an opportunity to transform themselves from students into scholars, and importantly, to participate in scholarship that not only adds to knowledge, but has the opportunity and indeed the promise of helping to change the world. Today we'll hear from 3 students, 2 undergraduates and 1 graduate student who've been active with Grand Challenges. I'm going to introduce each one individually in turn, and each one will tell you a little bit about her experiences and interests and interaction with the program. We'll leave plenty of time for questions at the end. First today, we have Kim Bonner, who is a senior in the Department of Molecular Biology. Kim's from Medford, New Jersey. She was a member of the cross-country team. She's now researching malaria control programs for her senior thesis. She's been very involved in public service at Princeton, including a summer internship at the Energy Subcommittee of the House Committee on Science. She did an internship at the U.S. State Department working in the Office of International Health and Biodefense, located in the Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs. Thanks to Princeton, she went to Tanzania for thesis research over intersession, and she is a member of the inaugural class of the Scholars in the Nation Service Initiative. Delighted to introduce Kim Bonner.
As she said, I'm a senior in the... Turn closer? This is good? Okay. I'm a senior in the molecular... Hi? Can you hear me now? No.
Kim, do you want to use the podium microphone?
Sure. Sorry. Okay. So as Kiki mentioned, I'm a senior in the molecular biology department. I've got about 13 days till my thesis is done. And I'm really enjoying my last few weeks here. I'm here today with the Pace Center, and it's really my privilege to share with you how Princeton has enabled me to live a life that's focused on civic engagement. I think that all of us can develop our sense of civic engagement young in life. We can get it from our family, our other values that we have from volunteering, from religious activities, from teachers and from friends. And I know that that's where I've developed my sense of civic engagement. I credit Princeton, however, with allowing me to experiment with different possibilities for doing this. I entered Princeton eager to learn about all kinds of different issues in the world, and the first thing I studied was energy policy. I was concerned about our nation's oil consumption, the consequent energy dependence, and the environmental degradation that resulted from it. my freshman seminar, A Biography of Energy, really gave me an excellent framework for understanding both the pros and cons of different energy sources. I really enjoyed learning about the possibilities of cellulosic ethanol and about wind power and geothermal energy. I wanted to see how these policies played out on a political level, and I started to seek advice for where I could work for a summer to learn about this. One of my roommates told me that one of her professors could help me out. So though he'd never met me before, Joe Michaels, who's the director of Princeton's Institute for Science and Technology of Materials, agreed to meet with me and advised me that if I wanted to learn how policies are made, I should go to Capitol Hill, and I should go to the Energy Subcommittee of the House Committee of Science. Like most DC internships, it was unpaid, so the Pace Center sponsored it. My time on Capitol Hill was overwhelmingly positive, but I did leave knowing I didn't want to work for Congress. Though my colleagues, all of whom were PhDs, were incredibly committed to solving many of our nation's problems, they couldn't get the bills passed. And it was incredibly frustrating and discouraging to see the partisanship that was present on Capitol Hill. Our specific committee, the Science Committee, had a great reputation for bipartisanship and really worked together to improve relations, to advance science and health and energy policy. However, we couldn't get the bill that we worked on, for me the whole summer, for them the whole year, onto the floor, and it was definitely discouraging. As I thought about these things, I realized I wasn't as enthusiastic about these rapidly oscillating political agendas as I thought I was. I was much more interested about how good policies could be implemented. So I decided to look to see how different departments actually implemented these policies that were passed in Congress. I was, and still am, intensely interested in energy policy. However, that summer, I read a book that really changed the direction of my studies. It wasn't a textbook, it was actually a biography called Mountains Beyond Mountains, and it was sent to me from the Pace Center because I was sponsored by the Pace Center. It's the biography of a man named Paul Farmer, and he'll be speaking at our baccalaureate this June. Paul Farmer has lived an incredible life, one that challenges both my perceptions of what it's possible for someone to accomplish and the inertia that I see about solving these problems. As a medical student at Harvard University, Paul Farmer spent much of his time actually in rural Haiti, only flying back to take exams. He founded a health clinic there, and over 20 years really worked to improve the health of that region. His efforts launched an international non-governmental organization called Partners in Health, which has really made a great impact on TB throughout the world in areas as diverse as Haiti, Chile, and Russian prisons. As I read the book and I thought about Farmer's life, I realized that there are so many health needs in the world around us. I started to research global diseases, and I was horrified to learn that over 1 million kids die each year of malaria, and that in Africa, 1 in 5 deaths of children is from malaria. My heart went out to these people who I'd never met, most of them who could have been easily treated by diseases, or could have been treated for these diseases in the US. I realized that many of these deaths occur because health infrastructures are poor in developing countries, and medicine is often too expensive for ordinary people to purchase. I realized that the US government, as a major global donor on health issues, could really make a difference in the mortality statistics from these diseases. Therefore, I started to chart a course that would enable me to be a contributor in improving global health. My junior year was a big year for me. I was looking for ways that I could get involved in government global health effort, and I happened upon a sign hung up on campus. It was for the Scholars in the Nation's Service Initiative, and it said that if you got the fellowship, you could have a summer internship with the government and then 2 years working for the government after graduation, and then a master's in public affairs. It sounded perfect. I knew that the offices I wanted to work in wouldn't hire a recent graduate, especially one who didn't have a master's degree or a PhD. And so I knew this was probably my only shot at getting an early experience in public health. So I applied for the program, and I was delighted and surprised that I was accepted. So now I was set with an internship for the summer and a job after graduation. All I have to focus on now was my thesis. I decided to do my thesis on malaria control programs in Tanzania to see how they could be improved. In Tanzania, fully 1/2 of the people in the country get malaria every year. 95% of the population is at risk for contracting malaria. The health burden is so immense that, according to some estimates, it's the largest health concern in Tanzania. I knew that to really fully understand the programs, I would have to spend time researching them here, but I'd really have to experience them firsthand. And I was fortunate enough to get a grant from the university to see the programs for myself. I interviewed policymakers, donor agencies, researchers, factory owners, and ordinary people about various aspects of malaria control. As I learned about Tanzania's BedNet voucher program, an innovative program that builds up the private sector while allowing people to have access to bed nets at an affordable price, I realized that this was an excellent policy. And I decided to recommend a similar policy be implemented for the drugs, the artemisinin combination therapies for malaria that are currently too expensive for an ordinary person to buy. This has never been tried in Tanzania before, and I know it will require significant investment, but I think it could be tremendously beneficial. My senior thesis research has really been a great experience because it's allowed me to focus on one of the world's grand challenges. In attempting to contribute to the solution, to part of the solution to this problem, my thesis research has been incredibly meaningful to me, and I'm so grateful to Princeton for providing me with opportunities both inside and outside the classroom to really learn about this and hopefully contribute in the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kim. Next, we have Lisa Kelley, also a senior. Lisa's a major in the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology department. She's also seeking a certificate in environmental studies. At Princeton, her academic interests have focused generally on field and theoretical ecology, but she also has significant interest in English literature and creative writing. She's pursued her interest in ecology with field research on a Maasai group ranch in Kenya. She'll tell you about that today. And she's also participated in the EEB department's field biology semester in Panama. Her plans for the upcoming year include leading an English language immersion program in rural China and working in Hanoi, Vietnam. Lisa?
Thanks a lot. Good volume? Okay. First of all, thank you to Woodrow Wilson School, PEI, and the School of Engineering for organizing this colloquium, and to Dr. Jamieson for moderating this panel, and to my two fellow panelists, because it's been really fun to hear about what they have been doing. And I wanted to talk mostly today about my involvement with Grand Challenges, but I thought I would start with the build-up to that experience and the development of my interests at Princeton. And interesting for me has been that I came in, as Dr. Jamieson said, with really strong interests in English and creative writing, and I was almost 100% certain that I would study this. So it's been very interesting that Princeton's really allowed me to explore different ideas and different interests. And the first of those strong interests I want to talk about that led me to Grand Challenges is an interest in conservation and in field biology. And it started when I was pretty young, just through an interest in the outdoors and in camping with my family in and around Pennsylvania, and developed some more when I did some trail rebuilding when I was about 15 or 16. But academically, I'd say it only really started at Princeton with a course I decided to take my freshman year on the ethics of conservation. We read a lot of accounts, conflict between indigenous populations and conservation efforts in the developing world. And it inspired me enough to figure that I was young enough to run in that direction for a while and see if it was something I was really interested in studying. So I talked to the professor of the course, a lady named Sarah Greenleaf, and I asked her if she had any ideas for what I could do that summer involved in that. And she said if I was willing to get dirty and do a lot of field work, I could be her field assistant on a project she was starting at UC Davis. And so that was the summer after my freshman year. And the project involved studying Pierce's disease, a disease of grapevines, which by 2000 had destroyed about 1,000 acres of grapevines in Northern California and had cost the wine industry about $30 million. So her hypothesis going in was that if degraded riverside communities along the Napa River were better at facilitating transmission of the disease, then there could be a case for conserving, an economic case for conserving those areas. I got to do a lot of data analysis. That was my first time playing scientist. I did a lot of work with aerial images, and I did a lot of field work. And I left having had such a positive experience that I was already pretty certain coming into my sophomore year that I wanted to study biology, and particularly environmental studies. And I would say the next formative experience in terms of developing my interest in field biology and ecology was my experience, as Dr. Jamieson mentioned, in the study abroad program in Panama. And it's run through the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology department, and you go down with 12 other kids that are really into biology, and you spend about 100% of your course time out in the field, which is a biology kid dream. And yeah, it was just a really great experience. The classes are designed so that basically you get to come up with your own research ideas, run around in the field, collect the data for it, write it up, analyze it, and put it together in a report. So that was really important, really definitively decided for me that field ecology and field biology was something I wanted to pursue. And the second of my major interests that led me to Grand Challenges was an interest in sustainable development and issues of land use and development in the developing world. And this was less academic and more personal, and I'd say was really cultivated during my experience in rural China the summer after my sophomore year. And I had become involved with Princeton in Asia my sophomore year, a nonprofit that's based on campus. And I had heard about a summer program that they were organizing to send 10 to 12 undergraduates to teach at a teacher's college in Hunan province of Western China. And I didn't speak any Chinese, and I didn't really know anything about China, but that sounded really very neat. And looking back, I feel incredibly lucky to have participated because it informed my academic interests in a way that I really didn't anticipate. I thought I was in for the cultural experience, and that was certainly part of it. But I came out with sort of feeling that sustainable development, well, it was my first experience living in a developing country, and it was my first serious encounter with rural poverty, and these became personal issues for me in a way that they certainly weren't when I talked about them in the context of my conservation courses. And much of that was just living in the community we were teaching in and interacting with students who were my age, who were so amazingly grateful of the time and the energy that we were spending to teach them, and who were also just genuinely unsure as to why any American would choose to live and teach in their town rather than one of the developed coastal cities such as Beijing or Shanghai. And most of the students were Tu and Miao minority students, really poor from rural regions, drawn to this city for the teacher's college. Many of them hard off enough not to be able to afford eyeglasses, so they would sit close to the board and squint to be able to read. what I would write in large font. And even the city, which was relatively well off compared to the rural regions from which the students were coming from, you could rarely walk a block without encountering someone begging for food or for change. So as I said, that made these issues that I had read about feel very personal. And so those two interests in field biology and in rural poverty and land use, they really made my experience with Grand Challenges a lot more meaningful. And I came to Grand Challenges actually through Professor Pacala, who just spoke, because he was a professor of mine in Panama for my coral reef course, and as you can tell, he's very compelling. And we were talking about senior thesis research, and he suggested that I might be interested in looking into the Water in Africa project with Professor Rubenstein in the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology department. And the Water in Africa project is a joint effort between the School of Engineering, Ecology and Evolutionary Biology department, and the Politics department that's looking at how understanding the interplay between vegetation, climate, water, wildlife, livestock, humans, all of these things can better inform water management in semi-arid and arid regions to improve the livelihood of peoples. So as I said, I began to talk with Professor Rubenstein when I got back from Panama and Professor Pacala's recommendation, and conversations with him that spring led to an idea for my senior thesis. And with the help of Princeton Environmental Institute, I had summer funding. I got to spend my past summer out on a group ranch, a Maasai group ranch in Kenya, researching this idea, which was on how the distribution, abundance, and quality of surface water in the area affects wildlife and livestock visitation. Thank you. So I'll skip over most of the details of my field methodology because it's pretty boring. But the basic idea is that on this group ranch, they've divided part of it into a conservation area. And I mapped about 10 ponds in each area, so ephemeral water supply. And I mapped about 3 river access points in each, the free grazing area and the conservation area. And then after the rains, I measured about 50 ephemeral pools in each area. So that really lasted only for 5 or 6 days. And the idea was I would surround the sources, the perimeter of the sources with sand, so that during any set sampling period, I would be able to see what wildlife and livestock tracks were laid, so get an idea of the distribution patterns at the water sources. And I thought the best way of explaining what this project meant to me in terms of a culmination of my interest and really what I thought Grand Challenges aims to do, as Professor Pacala said, with the disciplinary and the interdisciplinary, would be to share some of my results, because I think they speak to the interplay of my interests and the development, and sort of like a culmination of my education, these two things. So the first major result that I found was that non-predatory wildlife are visiting the conservation area significantly more than they'll visit the free grazing area. And conversely, predatory wildlife will visit the free grazing area significantly more than they will the conservation area. And so far as the residents in the region, this maybe suggests that setting aside that land for a conservation area is perhaps doing what they had hoped, and building up wildlife populations that might sustain ecotourism. And on the other hand, the concentration of predators in the grazing area maybe suggests that there's another cost on top of just setting aside that land. And the second major finding was that as the number of days since rain increases, and it's well shown in my study sources, they're sort of decreasing, so you see a surface water availability going down. Intensification at any ephemeral source, any of the ponds or the truly ephemeral pools, really increases the visitation to them. And this is true for wildlife and livestock in both areas. And so what the idea from this is that when it rains and when you have available surface water, the impacts on the vegetation are going to be a lot more diffuse. So that's important just in terms of thinking about the livestock's need for vegetation as well. And the third major finding, and the thought I'll leave you guys with, so I can let Teshe speak, is that during these times when surface water availability is decreasing, visitation to the perennial or the river sources is really increasing by both wildlife and livestock. And at that same time, though, no matter the level of water availability, visitation to perennial sources is significantly lower. So this seems to suggest that there's a significant travel cost to getting to the river sources, and there's probably a cost experienced by wildlife populations and managed by the pastoralists. The livestock populations don't experience so much in terms of predation. So yeah, Grand Challenges really gave me an opportunity to hands-on experience with these issues, to play scientist and to really explore them more. And I'd definitely be interested in answering any questions you had. So thank you for your time.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Next, we have Teshe Ukueberuwa. Teshe is a second-year graduate student at the Woodrow Wilson School. She'll be graduating this June with a joint master's in public affairs and urban and regional planning. Teshe is the graduate student representative on Princeton's Sustainability Committee. She trained as a climate justice organizer in 2005 and was selected the same year as one of 100 international youth delegates to the 11th Conference of the Parties for the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. She worked last summer at Trenton Center for the Urban Environment, learning how New Jersey's newest climate change policies actually impact the livelihoods of New Jersey's urban population. She's had internships at the U.S. EPA and at the National Council of Churches Eco-Justice Programs. Teshe's family hails from the oil-producing Niger Delta region, and as a Nigerian citizen raised in New Jersey, she's worked in Nigeria as an international fellow for the United Nations, working to design safety protocols and training manuals for workers in that nation's nuclear and hazardous waste industries. Teshe is also a 2004 graduate of the Environmental Studies program at Dartmouth.
Thanks so much, Professor Jamieson, and I also want to thank the Princeton Environmental Institute for the opportunity to speak here today. Can you hear me? Great. A little bit louder? Sure. It's really a pleasure to be here today, especially because I will be graduating from the Woodrow Wilson School this June. I actually come from a family of Princeton graduates. My older and younger sisters both graduated from Princeton. So for my parents who are Nigerian immigrants who came here with basically nothing between them, it's really a dream fulfilled for us all to have graduated from Princeton here. I have a lot to reflect on as the school year winds down. Graduation will really be the culmination of a really enriching experience in both my academic and extracurricular pursuits. So here at the Woodrow Wilson School, I've taken on the joint degree in public affairs and the urban and regional planning masters. The latter degree has really complemented my public policy focus here. It's allowed me to apply some of the more quantitative policy tools and techniques to some more on-the-ground work that I've participated in largely through the Princeton Environmental Institute and the Grand Challenges work. My classroom and outside work here at Princeton have very much been mutually reinforcing. Through my participation in several programs within the Princeton Environmental Institute, I've translated my academic interests to on-the-ground work. And it's without a doubt that my ability to apply the academic pursuits to the on-the-ground work that has really been the highlight of my experience here. So before I speak about the programs that I've been involved in with the Princeton Environmental Institute and Grand Challenges, I want to talk about my research program here at the Woodrow Wilson School, because the themes that I'll mention in my research will relate directly to the work that I've done on campus. The hallmark of the Woodrow Wilson School graduate experience is our second-year policy workshop, as I think there's some second-year MPAs in here. And all of the second-year graduate students must participate in the workshop during the fall term. Typically, a team of about 6 to 10 students will work together, will do some empirical research, write a policy report, and present the research to a client. Our workshop was entitled Urban Expansion, Land Conversion, and Affordable Housing in Zhengzhou, China. Our team was led by Professor Shlomo Angel, and our client was the World Bank. The workshop included travel to China in October to conduct field research. My particular contributions to the research took the form of 2 chapters on agriculture and urban and rural land conversion in the rural periphery of Zhengzhou, which is a medium-sized city in central China. While part of the research described China's agricultural land conversion rates, I also considered what these changes looked like on the ground. In particular, I was interested in seeing how rural populations were coping with the changes to their landscape. I further asked what implications this might have for urban planning practices. To provide some background, in 1994, the Chinese central government developed strict agricultural land preservation laws, which mandated that 80% of currently cultivated land be preserved indefinitely as farmland and protected from urbanization. The main idea behind the agricultural land preservation laws was first to protect rural farmland from urban development so that China could maintain its food security targets of 85% food self-sufficiency, and secondly, to protect the welfare of rural citizens who make up still over 50% of China's 1.3 billion residents. So they're really a large population of rural residents still in China, even with the tremendous economic growth that's happened in the past decade. What drew me to the topic of rural agriculture was my ability to look at the human impacts of environmental decision-making. My interviews with rural residents of Zhengzhou revealed that there exists some disconnection between the farmers' desires and the policy prescriptions designed to protect their interests. As rural poverty is an increasing problem, Zhengzhou's farmers have in recent years become entrepreneurs. Many have opted to construct housing projects of 3 to 4 stories on their properties in order to accommodate migrants who are moving to the cities from deeper in the rural areas. Those same migrants are finding jobs in Zhengzhou City, but they really can't afford to live in the Zhengzhou City proper because of the high rents. So this construction of the housing projects, sometimes built jointly by many of the rural villagers, has actually provided rural farmers, through collecting rents, with income that is nearly 15 times greater than the income that they normally receive from farming alone. So this seems like a really great solution to some of the rural poverty problems that a lot of studies have documented in China. But the process of constructing these projects is actually an illegal practice under China's farmland security laws that I described earlier, which prohibit the unapproved construction of any such developments on agricultural land. So therefore, it looks like some of the policies meant to assist farmers are currently infringing on their ability to take circumstances into their own hands and to lift themselves out of poverty by developing these private rental projects. This new development in Zhengzhou's urban fringe is also becoming a trend in other cities, such as Tianjin, and the World Bank actually did a report on that earlier last year. From an urban planning perspective, the Zhengzhou Planning Board viewed the smaller developments built by these rural farmers as positive social progress. However, they also note that they are inconsistent with the city's master plan and thus harmful to Zhengzhou's intention to grow in a compact manner, which, under typical urban planning policies, is associated with less sprawl, greater energy efficiency, and better conditions for public transportation to thrive. So as the central government now develops its new agricultural reform measures that is currently involved in negotiating, they must consider numerous new trade-offs different from 10 years ago when they passed the original agricultural land preservation policies. This includes balancing recommendations about the character of poverty alleviation practices with the pursuit of urban planning policies and with maintaining food security. It's to be determined in the next couple of years what path that they'll choose to follow, but the World Bank in our presentation seemed pretty encouraging about the results that our group came up with and about sharing them with Chinese officials, and the results of our workshop will be published. So the China project really resonated with some broader themes that I pursued in my academic and professional career before coming to Princeton and while here. These projects largely fall under the idea of environmental justice. The topic of environmental justice speaks to the interconnection between environmental protection and human rights, and attempts to find a mechanism for the involvement of a diversity of people in the creation and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies, and for their equal protection under those laws. I actually became involved in environmental justice because of personal interest. My father's family is from the Niger Delta area, and his community largely depended on fishing for generations. But when, in the late 1970s, multinational oil companies came in and started drilling, the marine and riparian communities became very polluted. Marine and riparian life became very polluted, and the fishing populations declined. It really devastated economically my father's community. So this year I've had the pleasure to serve as the class preceptor. This is more about, I want to get into my campus work right now. So this year I've had the pleasure to serve as the class preceptor for two great professors, Professor Melissa Harris-Lacewell and Kimberly Smith, who are teaching Princeton's first class on environmental justice. Over the spring break, we took 11 students to New Orleans to work on the John Tilley project. The project was started by a Dartmouth professor who wanted to take a more systematic approach to his volunteer work in New Orleans. So we decided to recruit students to walk around neighborhoods in New Orleans and to basically color code each house. We walked around and we would mark a house as red if it was blighted, orange for gutted, yellow for a work in progress, and blue if it's already been renovated and moved into. The information that students collected has been used to create maps of neighborhoods throughout the entire city of New Orleans. So this pursuit has really taken the guessing game out of service delivery with the maps. Now social services and government agencies can go in and target the specific neighborhoods and specific houses with the resources that they need. So it was really great to be a part of that project, which was an exercise in needs assessment. I've also been involved with the Princeton Environmental Institute initiative, along with two other Princeton students on campus. The project, called Home Energy Action for Trenton, or HEAT, was initiated by Robert Harris and Joseph Highland of Environ Consulting Group and Isles Community Development Corporation in Trenton. The HEAT project targets Trenton's low-income neighborhoods and provides weathering services and energy efficiency upgrades for residents living in Trenton's substandard housing stock, which is about a third of the housing stock in Trenton. Presently, low-income homes are actually 30% less efficient than the highest income homes nationwide. And so the hope is that with weatherizing low-income houses in Trenton, we'll be able to reduce energy costs for residents and also decrease Trenton's overall carbon footprint, as well as to create green jobs for the people who are involved in construction and weatherization projects. My role in the project was to identify substandard housing in Trenton and to develop a study design for the research which would help to document how to measure energy consumption levels prior to and after the weatherization was performed in each house. Incidentally, Marty Johnson, who's the executive director of Isles, will be speaking here tomorrow at 1 p.m. So finally, last year, I also co-founded and co-chaired a campus-wide campaign aimed to help Princeton become a university leader in climate change policy. This included, along with a team of students, some are in this room, at WWS and other also undergraduate students, understanding the cost and benefits of pursuing emissions reductions opportunities on campus, the unique capabilities of Princeton to do so, and finally using the data to estimate various emissions targets for the university to consider adopting. One of the more fun things that we actually did was education and outreach on campus, and we actually planned a Princeton Community Climate Action Rally that we held here outside last April, and we invited Princeton Professor Robert Socolow, David Brighthart, who's the director of Princeton Sustainability Commission, and Nikki Sheets, who's the director of the Trenton Center for the Urban Environment. The event attracted hundreds of Princeton students and township residents. This year, we're really happy that Princeton adopted a sustainability plan, and they decided to, with the goal of reducing carbon emissions to zero by 2050. So right now I can really graduate in peace and feel fulfilled that our tremendous work paid off. And so finally, I just want to commend the Princeton Environmental Institute for its commitment to service and its students through the Grand Challenges Initiative. It's really been an amazing experience for me to participate in the activities here.
Thank you very much, Tayshe. We have time for questions. Just one question I'd like to ask each of our panelists to respond to quickly is, what happens after Princeton? What do you do now? Sure. Does that microphone work?
Can you hear me? Okay. After Princeton, I intend to work in Tanzania. I'll be working for the President's Malaria Initiative, which is a U.S. Government partnership between USAID and CDC.
I will be working, I will return to Jishou, China for the summertime and lead another round of teachers. And then I will go on to Hanoi, Vietnam, to work for a nonprofit organization there, Traffic, that deals with the illicit trade of wildlife products.
I actually don't have a job yet. I'm looking for a job. I'm applying for jobs right now. I'm hoping to work either in Trenton in the government or in New York City government within environmental protection and hopefully applying the environmental justice perspective.
There are questions for our panelists? Yes. She'll bring the microphone.
Hello, my name is Carl Meyer. I'm editor of a magazine. We're doing a whole issue on the green issue. I was struck by Time magazine's piece 2 weeks ago on biofuels. The argument being that we've been misled as to the environmental benignness of biofuels, that the deforestation around the world is doing more damage than whatever benefit you get from the switch from oil and other energy sources. I'm wondering, since you've been involved with land use issues in China, Tanzania, Nigeria, Panama, Africa, whether this has been an issue that's been on your radar at all. The problem of deforestation, the problem of whether the biofuel combine, which is getting generous subsidies in Capitol Hill, is undermining what you were trying to do ultimately about the carbon footprints.
Well, let's see. I haven't read that article. My thesis is due in 17 days. But to speak to, we did speak some about deforestation in Panama and the patterns you see in Latin America. It may be more pertinent to the question of food in Kenya and food shortage in terms of my own experiences, because it's rising because of the rising price of grain. So I don't know how much I can speak about carbon footprint, but that's my impression, is that it is a bit scary to think of world food prices rising and populations that have incredible food shortages already.
Okay. I also did not read the article in Time. I'm sorry, but I think that a lot of the issue with cellulosic ethanol revolves around whether or not corn-based, sugarcane-based, or a lot of the problem with ethanol revolves around what you get it from. And so I think if we can move to something that is from switchgrass or something that is much, you can get a much higher energy benefit out of, then it would be less detrimental to deforestation. But I can't speak to deforestation currently.
Thanks. Yes?
I wonder if that was a terrific question, if we could ask Professor Kapala to give a perspective on that.
So in the room here, we know a lot about that. The issue is, as Kimberly said, an issue of where you get the biofuels from. If you get them from corn, from grain, all of the evidence is that it's just a net negative. All right, it takes 85% of the energy in the biofuel expended as fossil fuel, as fossil energy, just to make the stuff to begin with, and it does indeed increase the price of grain and does indeed increase the pressure to deforest land to create the agricultural land to make up that difference, right? And it does raise the price, as Lisa said, of food all over the world, and we're really beginning to see the damage that that's causing. So it's all about where you get it, and it is, in fact, in my view, possible to produce biofuels in a way that is environmentally benign, or at least in a way in which the costs are acceptable. All right, there are many different ways of doing this, and this is a subject that the scientific community has to engage in, and it's one that the Energy Grand Challenge is really embracing. So it's a long discussion, and I'd be happy to have it with anybody if you want to have the seminar on it, but I'm not going to inflict it on the rest of you.
Thanks. Yes.
Yes, George Hawkins. Of course, that was a great job position. You ever want to come to Washington, D.C.? I'll talk to you after. Government in D.C. But my question is the three students. When I was a student here, there was no PACE Center. You are extraordinary examples of service on behalf of students. Do you think there's anything the university ought to be doing more than it is, or maybe it is, to encourage more students to follow in the path that you have taken?
I think the funding that the PACE Center and PEI have provided really makes a difference for allowing students to have the experiences that we've had, because most summer internships related to public service are unpaid.
And just personally being involved right now in the process of trying to fund another trip to G-Show, PACE Center has certainly been incredibly helpful in funding that, as has peers. The class of 1948, etc. It's certainly a strain, and I would love to see the development of international service internships on campus and some additional funding from the university. I think it would be absolutely net positive. So,
I didn't mention that the PACE Center actually funded the New Orleans travel. They partially funded the New Orleans travel, so they really are doing a great job in being really affecting some of the programs also in the graduate school. And on that level, I actually think that more graduate students, or I think that they could actually reach out to more graduate students, so in their attempt to involve them in work on campus. So that's something that I would say.
A very quick follow-up. All of your answers suggest what you would do once you got the bug. Now I want to do this. Is there money that allows me to? I'm sort of also interested, if you have a thought on prior to that. What was, I think each of you, the common denominator was you had a class or a particular teacher that triggered this interest. And is that done systematically? It's done certainly much more so than it was when I was a student. I'm just curious on your thoughts. That initial trigger, you'll have this bug forever, so it's going to be a challenge now that you always have. It's a great challenge. The question is how to make sure more students have the same challenge and trigger that you have.
May I,
Sure.
George? I think that it is true that for many students that first opportunity in a classroom to really open their eyes to a public problem is what generates the motivation and the energy to continue forward. And I would point to the Grand Challenges Initiative as a great model for the university. I think we have opportunities right from the beginning to expose students to some of these really exciting and difficult problems and to encourage them and to welcome them in as partners in helping to solve those problems. So I see, the Grand Challenges Initiative certainly takes a huge step forward, and lots of other departments and professors and programs are moving in concert with them.
Can I add something? I know I'm not on the panel. So my name is Tony DeMello, and I'm a second-year student with Teiche at the Woodrow Wilson School. And I started something here when I first came called the Woodrow Wilson Workers, which was this notion of if you're going to have public policy people be trained at this school, they actually had to know a little bit about their communities and include, in addition to the academic work, it's super important that we go to Trenton or we work in Newark and get a sense of the sort of on-the-ground policy side. And there are two really frustrating things. The first frustrating thing was that generally this idea when you're talking about starting that flame, if it doesn't come from class, I didn't really feel that it was something that sort of the academic community at Princeton and the administration supported. There's this notion that, you're here for graduate school and we want you to study and things you do on the side are great, but that's not part of your degree. And so that was something that was a real challenge in establishing it. And when we first started to try to get sort of people involved, it was more than about funding, because there were 75 students interested out of 150 in this graduate school, and there was no formal program. And so we started the Woodrow Wilson Workers to respond to that. And the second thing that Tayshe pointed to a little bit is the PACE Center is actually incredible, and they offer a variety of programs, but one of the things I think we're working on is trying to get graduate students more involved with the undergraduate programs. So, for example, there was a great trip in January where 23 undergraduate students went to New Hampshire to canvass for the elections, and you could go with any sort of group you wanted, and that was part of sort of civic engagement. But initially, that wasn't something that targeted graduate students. And so a few of us joined this initiative, and it was found to be extremely valuable for undergraduates and graduates to embark on that together. So I think, for me, funding is not the issue, because this is Princeton, and there is funding everywhere. But I think part of it is things like this forum, where the academic community not only accepts the fact that civic engagement is part of your academic duty, but that it's intrinsic to your academic learning. So that's what I'd say. Oh, and now my dean's going to say something.
Just to follow up on that question, I think one common pattern, at least of the two undergraduate students, is the role of the freshman seminar program, which has been very successful in getting students interested in concrete problems very early on. And the fact that the Grand Challenge is going to contribute directly to the freshman seminar program is extremely important. But another thing the university is doing is to not wait until they're actually on campus. The new proposal to allow students to take a service gap year and have an international experience will get them interested in these type of issues before they even arrive as freshmen. So we actually are doing quite a lot to stimulate these interests very early on.
Hi, my name is Alexander Hurdle. I was hoping the panel could speak to what you feel the sorts of comparative advantages that students and more broadly young people have when approaching problems of civic engagement and global engagement.
Well, I know going in, I was very naive, and I had a lot of energy, and I wasn't very easily frustrated. So I think that's certainly a big advantage. There was no sense of jadedness. And it's still not. So no sense of being jaded or frustrated by the problems already, just sort of excited.
I think that young people also offer a fresh perspective. I think Lisa mentioned that she went into China. She didn't really know anything about China beforehand. Neither did I coming into it. I hadn't studied China. I've done a lot of work in the United States and Africa. So just bringing fresh perspective to bear on issues that are intractable, can actually be really beneficial ultimately.
I think one of the benefits of being a younger person and looking at these problems is that if we need to travel or go somewhere else, like to China or Vietnam or to Tanzania, we can just up and go. And that's very big. I think that's helpful.
Are there other questions? I invite all of you to come speak directly to the panelists after we're done, but thank you very much for coming today.